All right, I want to thank you guys all for coming out today. Today we have a special guest, Bradford Smith. I used to work with Brad at EA. I guess we talked about this maybe 7 years ago. It's been that long. He's had a very healthy career in the game industry, worked at Naughty Dog, and now he's at Epic Games. And so he's got a lot to talk to you about, so I'll go ahead and let Brad take it away. If you can give him a round of applause.
Thank you. You haven't seen the presentation yet, so please hold your applause until you see if you like it or not. No, but well, thank you, Nick, and for everybody at FIA for having me. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here, and I'm thrilled that I could be here and share my mysterious career with you. So the title, right, is Career Lessons and How to Thrive as a Generalist. And I guess on paper my career probably shouldn't work, but it has, and I've worn a lot of different hats, but there's a few principles that I always follow at any point in my career that I really sort of attribute to the success, and we'll go over those. So now, really important, I've got a few goodies here to give away, courtesy of Epic. So I'm imagining all of you have a raffle ticket right now. So if you don't, please let someone down here know. We'll make sure that you get one. And we'll call some numbers. We'll do probably closest without going over, Price is Right kind of style. Yeah. So as Nick said, my name is Bradford Smith. And since this is largely a career talk, I thought I'd have a little more fun in the introduction. And also, Google says that I should be authentic to win the audience trust. So we're going to give that a try. So I've been shaving my head since middle school because my hair is a hot mess, right? And it's crazy, right? And I'm really self-conscious about my socks showing. I know it's kind of the in thing to do when your pants are a little bit short right now, but it kind of drives me crazy, right? And I love loud rock and roll, but with like a super tight, like 10-inch subwoofer, closed box, really tight, accurate bass, super particular. And CDs are better. I know, I still like physical media in the digital age. Some of the guys at the office, they still make fun of me, but I really do still like the physical media. And of course, my plans for 2017 are simply really just to finally play Metal Gear. And I mean, Mother Base, right? It needs me. But you know, I certainly don't have it together, as you can see. Probably a little bit insecure, as we all are. But I've gotten the honor to contribute to a lot of great companies. At EA Tiburon here to start, Naughty Dog, taught for a little bit actually at Otis College of Art and Design, and most recently got to join the Epic Games team on Paragon. So, of course, some of the franchises that I've been able to contribute to are Madden and NFL. Madden NFL and NCAA football, most noticeably, at EA Sports. Uncharted 3 and Uncharted 4, of course. And Paragon, which is now still in beta and is Epic's new free-to-play MOBA. So during my time at Otis, I also had the privilege of teaching a few different topics. So environment art production mostly, but also some classes on ZBRUSH, and then some next-gen asset production once PBR became a real popular thing. But why am I really here today? First and foremost, to be completely transparent with you, to be open, to be honest. And I'm going to tell you some things that not many people actually know about me and that probably don't look good on a resume, but they're important lessons in these things. And I'm going to share you all the experiences, good and bad. We're going to talk a little bit about art tests, what I can anyway. And then we're going to touch on company culture and then some important career skills and some art skills that I think are important in any artist's career. So here are the key points that I say are good qualities to work by, and I've always sort of let guide me. So all the answers to the test are right here. So if I start to fatigue an hour from now or you fall asleep, this first section is where all the good stuff is. Of course, fundamentals first, right? We always have to go back to basics. And, you know, and what that means for a production environment is quite simply gameplay and narrative, right? So all of the content you create, everything has to serve the gameplay. It has to be a fun experience. Players want to come back and enjoy the game that they're playing. And you also always, always, always want to enforce narrative, right? So what is the world the character and the player are going to be living in? What is the experience about? Everything goes back to narrative. And I really mean that when I when I mainly do textures and materials, but it's still an opportunity to tell a story. And just recently at GDC, I was talking about this is a character from Paragon. This is Crunch, and he's a robot. But everything on here helps to enforce his story, who he is, what his background is. Every mark that goes into his textures is deliberate and is a chance to reflect who this character is and the world he lives in. And of course, we're all familiar with the art principles, good understanding of form, light, color, composition, all the typical tools, right? But as a CG artist, I always say that there's a few physical and technical fundamentals that I say are paramount, and that's photography. We're going to talk a bit about that. Of course, light, how it interacts with the physical world and how we perceive it versus what it actually is. And compositing, picking up a good book on compositing and looking at some CG fundamentals will take you a long way, because these are principles that I may not be able to execute mathematically, but I can find other implicit solutions. And then, of course, there's language. All of these fundamentals help inform how you communicate. So specific to generic, what do I mean by that? Well, okay, nobody likes graphs, but specialization over time, right? This is probably a better way to actually imagine your career at the beginning, right? You're probably, you've been dumped in a new world. You've got this nice, sharp, shiny axe, and you've got some skills to chop down some trees, but you haven't really attacked a rock yet, and you don't really have anything else to support you. But eventually, over time, this area is going to represent all your different skill sets. You're going to be a little worse for wear, probably a little crazy, and your health meter says you're pretty hungry, right? But you've got all these skills. You can cook now, you can farm, you can build chests and lock up your stuff and grow berries, right? So you're building your skill sets constantly over time. So how do we get there? Well, the first and foremost is to be flexible. And this was something I learned early on. You got to be able to go with the flow. Between technical abilities and artistic sensibilities. I think that, especially seeing your facilities here today, it's really impressive what you're doing. I think that you're all probably pretty adept technically, but it wasn't always that case when I was in the industry. You know, I think gone are the days where, you know, someone who says, I just want to be an artist and stay creative. I think that actually understanding some of the technical hurdles and then unblocking yourself actually allows you to do that. But I believe it's a personal responsibility. And that's really kind of what a CG is, a blend of those two principles. But when you look back, it's kind of always been that way, right? Because, I mean, an oil painter, I mean, my art teacher, for example, she used to grind her own pigments, because if she didn't, she probably wouldn't have been able to paint. My roommate in college, he used to do his own rabbit skin glue, size his own canvas. He dove into the technical fundamentals of what it meant to be a painter. And that really served him through the rest of his career. So when you look at, you know, okay, well then what could a successful lead or senior artist or something be like? You start to fold in a lot more skills, right? Some understanding of the physical world and optical properties of surfaces and light. Analytical thinking, workflow, people management, technical, artistry, right? Nobody's like this. This is impossible, right? You'll see job postings where they want all this stuff. But realistically, if I were to graph myself today, I'd probably do something like this. Like artistry, I'm happy 65% of the day making art, because that's at my core. That is deep within me at my root. And when I say art, you know, I'm not even the most creative guy. When it comes to design or off-the-wall ideas, I'm not the guy for that. But when you need observation, technique, and application, when you want to combine that with some workflow and maybe a little bit of scripting, okay, I'm your man. You know, and I've got a colleague right now who really good artist, but also knows gameplay, right? So everybody's skills are going to be a little bit different. And he comes up with really, really great ideas, thinks of things that I would never dream of. So it's really important to understand sort of where you are so that you can set yourself up for success within the organization and within your own work. Because ultimately, different is okay, right? So good teams, good studios, good leaders, they want to compose teams of people who are different, people who can fill each other's you know, gaps in skill sets, right? So if, and we were just talking about this earlier, if two people are the same, well then one must be redundant, right? But by having different skills and abilities, they can bring each other up and ultimately create a stronger team. I hope these guys don't mind. I'm using their names, but I used to work with them. Super good guys. But they're two really good examples of artists that I really respect and admire, and I think you've probably seen online, right? Because they both have pretty good presence. We've got Genesis PRADO and Andrew Maximov, both from Naughty Dog, right? And Genesis just does amazing, amazing color work, and does texture work that just, again, I wouldn't dream of. Andrew, super technical wizard, right? And he could program stuff in his sleep that I couldn't think of, right? And it's human nature to sort of, when you get into a professional environment or any environment, right, it's human nature to compare others and to try to draw your value by comparison. And that's a dangerous road to go down, because I'm not going to be a Genesis PRADO and I'm not going to be an Andrew Maximov. I probably sit somewhere in between, and we all have different skills that we can leverage through one another, right? So where does your value come from, right? Well, it kind of all over the place, and it's going to change throughout your career. But the first and most important thing is probably individual and company alignment, right? So, of course, what are your values and what are the company's values? You want to be able to believe in your product and your company. That's the first and most important thing. And then, what are the company's needs, and how can you help them be successful? And of course, your point of view. Are you a visionary or outside of the box thinker? Are you thinking long term? Maybe you're just really, really good at what you do, and you've got some really strong core competencies that you're refining, and maybe you do or don't have some additional skills that allow you to be more flexible. But this is the type of internal inventory that you want to manage over time in your career. And if you're anything like me, you're going to have to write them down and keep them in pretty little pie charts, because you're probably going to forget. And of course, acting with intention and integrity in everything you do. And I love this quote, actually, two amazing masters, Albert King said to Stevie Ray Vaughan in a live session once, most important thing, the better you get, the harder you work. That's absolutely true, right? And that's a process that never ends. You're going to be improving always and forever, really. And details matter. So in that process, don't overlook them. Dig deep. Ask why. Understand fundamentals. Now, a lot of my career I can attribute to good luck and timing. But there's another thing that goes along with that, and that's the ability to recognize an opportunity and then being able to run with it. And sometimes that goes against the grain, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be an uphill battle. But you know, if you're careful and you have a lot of data behind you and you're persistent and you don't give up, you can see it through to success. And of course, problem solving, as I've already said, getting to the root of things, finding real solutions for prevention over Band-Aids. If I have to stop what I'm doing in the middle of a day in order to debug some tangent issues that are constantly plaguing the game, let's get this figured out and never cross this bridge again, right? And then communicate that out. It's quite that simple. Just let everybody else know. And of course, keep your eyes on the horizon. So in my day-to-day work, I'm always trying to find a way to add value for tomorrow, whether it's by adding things to the library or, like I said, problem solving and documentation. I'm always trying to improve not just my own workflow, but the workflow for everybody else in the studio and the product as well. So roots. I talked about how important roots are. Mine began in Marblehead, Massachusetts, really, really small fishing town. In fact, I took these photos on one of my trips back. And yeah, super small town. But there was a problem. I never really fit like I fit in. In fact, I was a bit of a troublemaker. Although I like what Bart's lesson here, he will not cut corners, right? Because details matter. And that's probably why I'm such a good artist, too. I probably was just spending so much time drawing in detention hall. But I also started to learn the value of hard work at a very young age. As soon as I turned 14, I said, you know, that's it. I want to do this. I want to work. I want freedom. I want independence. I'm my own man, right? Well, this is the point in the presentation when I condition you to recognize this image with some kind of pivotal turning point or plot twist, right? See, here I'm thinking I'm going to go over here into like rock star popular territory, right? I'm driving a Jeep. But no, I was headed for wake-up territory. You see, the most valuable lesson I think I've learned is, so I let someone drive my car, right? Worked really hard. I should have known better. This was like a 2-year project, saved up, bought my car, let someone drive it. Turns out she didn't have a license. She crashed it. My selfishness, my own desires and need to fit in trumped the well-being of everybody around me. That was a very valuable lesson, and I think is a good one for business, in that you have to be able to put the welfare of the group first. Try to put yourself aside. And believe me, I'm telling you that, and I'm terrible at that. Just ask my wife. You know, I'm not perfect, but we have to always try to be better for the group. But another thing was happening. So I was starting to take traditional classes. My father had wanted to find me a place to start really working those skills at Acorn Gallery School of Art. Very, very traditional methodology, right? So more of like an atelier practice. So drawing eggs and bread until I could graduate to etching and then finally earn my way into oil painting. But what I learned there truly, and what will stay with me forever, is the amazingness of these two teachers, Jack and Deborah Heiberger. Two of probably the most selfless people that, pardon me, two of the most selfless people and joyful people, my mouth is dry, that I've ever met. And they weren't just there to teach, right? This wasn't a business. This was a home for kids. This was a place to give kids futures and to foster a community. And that, to me, set a really high standard for what teachers should be, and leaders as well. Now, there was another thing happening here, too, right? So There was a big shift in the industry. We've all seen Toy Story. This blew my mind when I was a kid. And I was a Nintendo fanboy, so coming out, I also at that time was getting into PlayStation, and Metal Gear happened, right? So I know by today's standards, I mean, he has half a face, but this was like cinematic experience in like an interactive format. It was fun, it was deep, and I was like, this is my jam. So I walked into my art room one day, and there's this old Apple computer with specular infinity, and I'm like, hey, what is this? You know, I'm checking it out, and I do some research. I had a hard time confirming this. I think it was used on Earth 2. Nobody here knows it. Maybe Nick does, but it was I loved the show. I mean, I'm old. You're not that. But it was a really popular show at the time, or maybe it wasn't. I liked it. That's all that mattered. So I learned how to kit bash primitives together. Right? This is terrible by today's standards, and there was no documentation. There was no Google. Maybe there was, I don't know. But I was just sitting down figuring it out. Clearly didn't know anything about iRest because I don't even know what I'm looking at on the right-hand side here. But I fell in love, right? Fortunately, it was enough to get me into Ringling College, along with my traditional portfolio as well. Well, okay, I'm old, but not that old, right? Okay, there I am. So I don't know what happened to me. Don't let that smile fool you too, because I was probably really stressed out at this time, as I'm sure all of you know. But that education was all about principles, right? So there was no games track or other different types of tracks. It was just animation, storytelling, narrative first in everything you do, principles. And I was excelling. I was like, this is awesome. I belong somewhere, right? Making all kinds of cool stuff. And then the thesis came, which the thesis is the final year project. It's a whole animated short. I'm like, great, modeling, having a great time, rigging. Even though like back then rigging was like you made one mistake, you had to throw the whole thing away and then re-rig. It was terrible. But facial animation tests, this is great. Lighting and shading, it's my jam. Story. Not so great. And apparently actually handling pre-multiplied alpha properly or straight alpha blending. You can see the halos there, but I'll forgive my college self. So what's the plot twist there, right? Here's the thing. If you don't pass your senior year, you have to go back and repeat your senior year. Doesn't matter how good you are at all of those things. If you can't communicate to your audience and have a successful short film at the end of that program, you're going to do it again. So I almost failed, right? Now I guarantee that's not on any of my resumes and cover letters, right? Those are carefully written. This is something I would not put on there. But there were some valuable lessons that came out of that, right? I had to dig deep. I mean, it was like 4 days of just just pounding that thing out. And I also got a little bit lucky in the end. But it taught me a really, really valuable lesson. You know, it's about the audience and the experience first. All of those things that I was trying to focus on, I wasn't focusing where I should have been. And of course, I was probably reading some self-help book at the time, and a Special Forces motto stood out to me. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong. And again, I'm going to preface this with, I'm terrible at all of this. That's why I need to remind myself of these things, and you should remind yourself as well. So schedule, right? Easy one. Now is always better than later, unless I need to clean the cat box or something, and I'm trying to save Mother Base, But glory, right? Putting the team over self. Hey, look at what the team did. Hey, look at what Bill and Bob and Sue and Mary did. Critique. It's really easy to poke holes in something and to criticize it. Believe me, I'm really good at that. But it's harder and more valuable to offer improvements. Quality, of course, don't settle. Always strive for better. Work, be clean and organized, especially if you're passing stuff downstream to other departments. There's a lot of value in being consistent and trying to stay bug-free. I'm going to get back to resilience in a second, but outsourcing is one that I think I threw on here because it's kind of relevant to a lot of jobs these days in CG. All the jobs I've had, artists have had some active role in the outsourcing for their particular department. And it's really easy to just kind of put that aside and focus on your work. But see, the people that are producing work for you, is also a reflection on you. So you have to be able to spend the time to be able to foster those teams as well, stay in communication with them, help them improve. And of course, there's no small tasks. There's only what is necessary to do a great job. You don't want to be saying, oh, well, I'm better than that, or I'm too big for that. I mean, the co-presidents at Naughty Dog, for example, they were actively developing on the titles. It may have been a small fraction of the time, but they were staying hands-on and they were doing what they could. So resilience, what do I mean by that? So another thing I'm really bad at, right, and this is something that really goes into my day-to-day. So you can respond logically or you can react emotionally. I'll give you a story here, one of the low points in my career, actually. So it was toward the end of a project. There was a big handoff happening because there was this level that was coming in late in development. And it was clear it needed like multiple people to kind of close it out. I was working on a bunch of stuff all over it, couldn't check it in because there was a big play test, and had a handoff strategy in place. Was okay, well, here's do X, Y, Z at this certain time. And the artist that was helping me out, there was a communication breakdown somewhere in there. And before I could check my stuff in, basically end up invalidating a lot of my work over the last couple days, right? So what did I do? I immediately took that opportunity to go yell at him. Believe me, you don't want to do that. In that case, we're both adults, and we, had a beer afterward and some water under the bridge. But, I was letting all that pressure get to me, and I reacted emotionally, and I took that as an opportunity to try to correct him, and in a not very positive way. Was I right in being upset about what happened? Probably, but there was absolutely no justification for how I reacted. So, career overview. 13 years to sum up in all these slides, so let's go quick. So, of course, after college, I said to myself, I'm going to make stories and art, and I'm never going to work for the man. The corporate job is not for me. So I got a job at Electronic Arts. And, but I'm glad I did, right? Because I'm telling you, I feel like it was a master class in the business of video games. If college set me up with the skills to be a successful artist, then EA really helped give me the tools to be a successful, or to build a successful art career. So at that time, right, there's a big console transition. The new Xbox 360 is coming out. The studio's hiring up a lot. It's a big game changer. Normal maps aren't really a thing yet. We're just, lighting is changing. There's more real-time lights. Seems trivial now, but there was, a big shift happening. The other thing that was happening, unfortunately, is Disney had shut down their animation studio, and a lot of really, really talented artists who focused on story were coming over to EA DEBRA. And my art director, Rick SLUITER, at the time, one of the first people I interacted with, and probably one of the most influential people. I only got to work with him for a short time. He was the art director on Mulan and Lilo and Stitch, although I realized I just got the wrong image up there. He wasn't on Mulan 2. My apologies. But he set the bar really high, because he did what I saw, or would imagine a good leader would do. He was giving credit to the team. Everything was always going back to narrative. And he was always a positive force, helping to keep a really strong vision on the product and to lift the team. And I think one of the analogies he used was like a piece of paper, like in the copy room floor. It's not just a piece of paper. And as an environment artist, it's really easy to just throw a bunch of stuff in the corners of the room, right? But those are opportunities for narrative. Was it an extra piece of paper that flew by the window because the window's open and there's songbirds, coming in, or was someone photocopying their butt and forgot to take one? Everything is an opportunity for narrative. And the company culture there was actually pretty fun. This is a pano I shot inside one of the conference rooms. I don't know if it's still there, but it also showed me that you can run a business, but you can have fun doing it and create a good place to work. Because, I mean, let's be real, game making is a business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, and EA, being a publicly traded company, has responsibilities. But they make great games. And they also have fun doing it, right? So this one in particular, my boss a little bit later, Dave Swanson, he had gone on vacation. They completely removed the door frame, drywalled and painted over it, and he couldn't actually get into his office, right? It was probably the most elaborate prank I've ever seen. And there was also a lot of, they were also actively improving people and teams, right? So a little bit later in my career, I was with the central environment team here. These are all the environment guys. And that's, so if I were to overview my career there, I kind of wore a lot of hats in the beginning as a texture artist and a lighter, ultimately end up as the senior lead environment artist. But those early days, as I said, under Rick Sluiter, when we were trying to figure out not only what this target platform was and how are we going to work, but what type of narrative could we fold into a football game? And if you want to talk about the hard right over the easy wrong, I mean, narrative into a football game, I mean, there's probably a lot of people back then that were like, well, what? But he was right in doing it. And look at all the titles now and the presentation. It always goes back to experience. And of course, there was a lot of stadium modeling, lots and lots of stadium modeling. And as I said, there was a shift at the time, right? So this is where flexibility started to come into my cone of vision. Art production was getting more technical, and it only gets more technical, as I'm sure you all know now. Pipelines, of course, became a lot more specialized and complex. And of course, dev costs were increasing rapidly. And I learned that you can be a specialist, right? And you can be really good at some things, but you have to be able to adapt and change with the tides, especially in this industry. So I started diving into technical fundamentals. As I said, I felt like I was a pretty good artist and I knew which buttons to hit, but I didn't know why. So I started looking at photography. Paul Debevic and Greg Ward's book was completely over my head, but I still reference that a little bit sometimes. But that Mental Ray book, by the way, nobody really uses Mental Ray anymore, right? But if you're interested in like CG fundamentals and just CG as a language, that's still a great reference to look at. You can probably get a used copy. So some of the technical fundamentals I was diving into, right? It was all becoming popular at the time, but was nothing new to the film industry. Gamma and linear workflow, right? All software expects you to manage it somehow, and most software expects it as a linear input, meaning your color swatches, your texture inputs, and you deal with it all the time, even if you aren't aware. And at every job I've been into, and even today, it seems like every 2 months, there's a discussion about color space issues and gamma and linear workflow. But I find that there's a resistance by a lot of people that it shouldn't be an artist problem. And I would tell you that it absolutely is an artist problem. It's no different than choosing like a boar hair brush over some Kolinsky brush. It's in your toolkit as a CG artist. If you're not aware of these things, you should be, because you're going to be dealing with them. And then compositing. A lot of what's helped me as a texture artist is just looking at like a compositing book and then doing some practice composites, and that's helped me make better textures. But of course, photography. At that time, I really dove into photography, and I loved it. And I can tell you that it's true. You don't take a photograph, you make it. But nothing has changed the way I look at not only the physical world around me, as much as photography has. And it's also really informed my day-to-day work and how I look at my CG tasks from a lighting and texture perspective, right? So we know that the way the eye handles light and simultaneous contrast and local color correction and luminance adjustment, right, is very, very different from the camera. The camera's just counting up photons. And once you start seeing that through the camera for the first time, it really gives you a lot of insight into how you see light and surface. But it also starts to change your perspective on subject matter, right? So now what is the relative subject and frame? Well, if it's something white, like a wedding dress, and everything has to be exposed down because it's irrelevant, that's okay. And then the other thing that happens is I found it as a great outlet to practice those composition and narrative moments in order to hone my skills as an artist, right? I was thinking about a lot of things on the fly. Within a couple of minutes, something could happen but I could shift myself to the right, change my viewpoint, and go with a little bit of a wider focal or narrower focal length and get a much more compelling image. There's a lot of artistic processing happening on the fly. But it's also an incredibly powerful tool. I've probably used it more just to go outside and shoot color checker charts. In this case, for direct and indirect ratios, and of course doing a lot of image-based lighting. But more importantly, I think, and this probably goes against a lot of convention right now, but it's my opinion that language is really a fundamental form of communication in CG, right? Because it's sort of like this fundamental referring principle. So what do I mean by that? So as an implicit form of feedback, right? Someone could say, well, make that 10% darker or twice as bright. Well, I don't really know what that means. And if you're me and you overthink things, then you're like, well, wait, is that linear space? Is that gamma space? Absolute? Perceptual? I don't know how to process that. What I always like is to be more explicit. Take half an exposure value darker or one stop brighter. These are immediately I know what these are, and it's implied that they're in linear space. And I can also visualize them. You've all seen a Macbeth chart, right? You've seen a Macbeth chart? And those little luminance patches down the bottom, they're not quite a stop apart, but they're close. So I always have that chart in my mind when I'm making textures and I'm grouping values across a scene. I'm always saying, oh, yeah, I kind of want it here in the dark zone or the middle zone or this zone. And then, oh, I want to take this group of local colors and stop them up or down. And it's all stuff that Ansel Adams taught years ago. Those are the fundamentals that drive me even as a texture artist. And I also think that some of the best tools are built on these fundamental workflows and languages. So back to business, back at EA, right? So fast forwarding years here, by this point, so I'm bringing a lot of these skills back in now. I'm starting to work with team leaders, doing more research and development. Linear workflow started to become this thing, and we were gathering lots of lighting data. And I also learned the value of workflows and pipeline there, because it wasn't just about getting the job done or getting the job done well, but it was about improving the process. And I don't know about you, I just hate doing the same monkey business over and over again, right? That's half the reason I learned to write scripts, is because it doesn't interest me. I want to spend my time being creative, because I'm not as good as at that. So the more that I can remove button pressing obstacles from my workflow, well, then the more I can just spend time staying in a creative mindset. And of course, I mentioned there was a lot of company-sponsored training, so I was involved with bringing these skills in, also teaching classes about new software and new techniques. By the end of my career there, poor guys, I was in a group called Core CGI, and this was a group of senior leaders that worked with multiple game teams. And I also learned a very valuable lesson here. Never take a group panoramic at crotch level. And one of the last tasks I was working on, which was kind of a nice throwback and got to glue all that stuff together. These are actually some of my photos I got to take during a game I went to with the art director. Working on cameras and presentations. So it's back to animation and narrative, right? So how can we bring more visual narrative through the form of camera work into Madden? And it was awesome. You guessed it. Damn you, Plinko. But I also found that I was making a lot less art. There was something a little bit missing for me. So if we say that this is kind of my ideal, this might be a little bit dramatized, but I was kind of somewhere in here. So of course, I did what anybody would do, start skill building at home and making things that should have been in my portfolio, but I didn't put in. And returning to classics, right? So getting the CG fundamentals down, and now complete 180 back to my roots. And was making terrible paintings. Although my wife keeps this in the kitchen because, well, she likes it, and I say that it just reminds us of our roots. But I mean, there isn't even any lost edges on there. I think I found them all. But it was interesting too, because Uncharted 2 had also just come out. And I said, that's my jam. I got to do that. And of course, if you know anything about that studio is rich in tradition. So a little bit about the art test, right? So this was interesting. As I said, I was trying to build a lot of my skills at home. And I was researching the company, and they're very public, and they said, they were very clear about how they work. And you always want to assess your skills against the company needs. It's important to have your own voice, but it's equally as important to be able to prove that you can function in the capacity that the employer needs in terms of quality and style. And so I knew they did ZBRUSH tiling textures and material blending, but man, this was me. Like, I had never opened ZBRUSH, right? Turns out this would actually be a pattern in my career, this art test process. But I dug in, and I just didn't sleep for a bit and made some art. And it's probably not, I wouldn't say it's super great by today's standards, but I had to do it their way. I had to show that I was able to operate under their constructs. And of course, then in that process, demonstrating, okay, I also made my own Maya blend material here. And then to showcase that I had some additional skills, I said, oh, I'm also testing it out in different lighting conditions, because that's the cool thing to do. Oh, but I also shot one of those panoramas there, huh? How about that? I guess it worked, because I packed up my cat and my bags. I mean, there was more stuff too, and started on Uncharted 3. So for a while there in the beginning, most notably worked on the Caravan level, and of course the Oasis multiplayer. And let me tell you, when you hand sculpt that much sand and rocks, you will be dreaming of sand and rocks. And as I'm sure you all know, it's a lot of hand sculpting, right? So I told you, a studio rich in tradition. It's real, but it's also very much informed by the artist's hand. Now, I had a problem because I wasn't a great painter, right? I understood color and composition, value from a technical standpoint. So I actually started doing things a little bit procedurally in Photoshop at the time. So trying to get that hand-painted look, and these are some of the results. And when I say everything is intentional there, did I say that? Everything is intentional there. I mean it. So, of course, we've got, it's kind of an obvious example, right? But this leading, this line is kind of two things. It's one, it's the current, but it's also the player path, which is, of course, is no coincidence. The current actually leads the player, but so does everything else, right? So the implied line by all of the models, even the placement and the motion of the vegetation, everything sort of converges to lead the player. Even the visual effects, all the little the particles up there, they're all very deliberately designed to craft an experience. And the textures are absolutely no exception, right? So whenever I set out to start making textures, I'm always thinking about one with the natural environment, right? So there's obviously going to be these lines here because of the current where the rock has been eroded away and formed. And, but it's also I'm going to use these as visual tools to help guide the player. And whenever I start out, I always start out with like a shallow foreground texture and then a deep background texture, because most people these days are doing height map blending, right? So you're blending maybe 2 or 3 texture sets together. So for me, it's always like mixing 2 different frequencies. And then when it comes to my application on the model, I really try to let the model inform where to do things, right? So letting the concave areas get more eroded, smoothing out the protruding areas, and just trying to react to the model and get this blending to happen naturally. And the other thing to point out too is that rhythm was really important, right? So those were obviously very sort of unidirectional. And here, when the current sort of slows down, things get a little more quiet, less aggressive in terms of the frequency of forms, and a lot more unidirectional. Or omnidirectional, I should say. So they're just kind of these like wispy, wavy things. Again, deep and shallow. And then here's an example from Uncharted 3, more of a very linear motif than curvilinear, but emphasizing the same thing. And then Also, imagining sort of like a top plane texture and a vertical plane texture. So when I blend these two things together, these sort of Z-depth layers will complement, all the striations that are happening on that side. And when the two blend together on the opposing planes, it works really nicely. And then, of course, sometimes you can create a lot of drama just in contrasting forms. So, quite simply blending this very soft curvilinear sand with this very hard-edged linear sand. So a little bit about some research and development, right? So as I said, not great at hand painting. So I was trying to find ways to kind of work procedurally with ZBRUSH and then automate things in Photoshop because I hate pushing buttons. And it was working out pretty well for me. And what happened one day is I was actually showing people this process in a demo at Naughty Dog. And then my technical director said, hey, Brad, you're kind of a nerd. You would like Substance Designer. And at the time, this was years ago. It was like 2.5 or something. I hadn't heard of it. It's like, all right, well, yeah, let me check that out. And at the time, there was a lot of a lot of people hadn't heard of it. But then also, procedural was kind of a scary word, right? And as far as people using Substance, it was really limited to a small market, mobile game developers who were mostly concerned with fast download speeds, right? But we saw this. And again, referring back to principles, it was clear, I like to call it, they're an object-oriented texture compositor plus more, right? It was clear that they're just a really well-executed and organized compositing program. And that it was going to be great for texturing. But that was not the public opinion at the time. And this kind of is a good example. This is actually one of the first tests I did. And it kind of emphasizes, it's not a material, it's not a texture, it's some frame buffers, but it's all just typical compositing stuff that's happening. So of course it could be applied to textures. If you can do it in Photoshop, you can do it inside Substance. And so that started a really, really interesting relationship, one that I'm very fortunate to have been a part of. You see, Logarithmic, they weren't in the AAA development yet. They were getting there, and they were working with some strategic partners, Naughty Dog being one of them. And they were helping us with our pipeline, and we were helping them with their product development, and which later turned into one of the later versions of Designer. I forget if it's 3 or 4, one of those. But it was a very, very unique experience. And of course, through that, we were prototyping our material pipeline, so trying to figure out, how are these things going to work? And at that point, right, we'd proven out a lot, but public opinion was still not so good. Now, your success, I also attribute to one other very important thing, and that's supportive leadership. You see, I had a clear vision of what this could be, and so did my lead, and he didn't give up on me despite anyone else's best efforts. We believed in this, and he helped fight. And if you're responsible for something that goes against the grain, don't give up. Stick to your beliefs. Even if you're doing other things in your day-to-day, keep making progress on that thing. Just like I said earlier, always try to find a way to add value for tomorrow. Solve problems, help people, and then form those positive associations with whatever your goal is. Oh, hey, you've got a problem? I've got a solution for that. Let me show you that. Ultimately, it was successful, right? But it took constant communication, a lot of training, a lot of support and troubleshooting and time. Jimmy, what are you looking at, buddy? Photography, right? Another really important thing. So this is kind of like another typical artist conundrum, right? So which one's the correct copper? Of course, they're all the correct copper, right? Incident lighting plays a large part on how we view surfaces to be, right? Well, here on the right, it looks a little too gold. Well, should we make the copper more copper and less gold? No, we probably shouldn't. It's more of a question of white balance and lighting. Or maybe it doesn't matter if the copper is green because that's the context with which it's in. And to demonstrate that, and this isn't a Naughty Dog specific thing. This is everywhere, and this is still happening, and it always probably will happen. The age-old back and forth, right? So you've got something on the right-hand side here. Someone says, it's a little dark. Okay, I'll brighten the textures as a texture artist. But then someone says, well, that's a little bright, and then the lighting compensates for that. Well, now the background's really dark. Okay, let's just make the background a little bit brighter, right? But now you've gotten away from what the core issue is. You've taken something that looks nice in the context of a scene and fits, but maybe just needs to be a little bit brighter and evaluated against other things, just like we would a painting, right? Grouping all of your local colors, picking your subject, and then letting everything else irrelevant fade away. Now, there's gameplay implications there, of course, too, that fold in, but what you end up with is going down that age-old back and forth is something kind of weird, right? A material that isn't quite as recognizable, and then your perception of all the other things around it are now thrown off. So it always stinks when that happens, right? Because then you've got to go back, refix the lighting, refix the textures, recalibrate everything, and then sit in front of a monitor and say, let's change it all again. So data to the rescue. Not that data, but this data. So we started shooting a lot of textures, right? Because it's the easiest thing to lock down. And just like photography informed the way I look at light and surface interaction, it also helped inform and help me group values in my head. So now I can kind of like just in Photoshop just sort of naturally pick colors because I've got sort of charts in my head now based on evaluating all this data. And to test that, I went downstairs in my poorly lit garage, and I said, okay, I'm going to shoot this brick wall with my camera as I think it actually looks. Well, after you correct for the camera response, the white balance, and the exposure, what I thought it was actually very, very different than what it was. I mean, this is probably like a two-stop difference or something. And of course, the best way to demonstrate, I know you're all cringing right now. Remember when the internet blew up and everyone was like, yeah. But really, well, yes, it does matter what it actually is. It was actually white and red. No, was it? I don't even know. But that's kind of the conundrum. Your eyes are big, fat liars. So you always have to refer back to data and then lock stuff down. And that's so extremely true with skin tones, right? So we actually shot a bunch of specularly and diffuse separated skin tone reference in order to come up with like a chart of good skin tone averages. I've blurred them out to protect their identity, of course. And of course, again, looking at a lot of lighting. So how could we take real-world lighting and make it a little more painterly to suit the product? And I got to shoot a bunch of IBLs again, analyzing light and then coming up with the material test beds. So I'm getting to use all these skills again, right? So these skills, even though you might not use them a lot, they're still very, very valuable. And they help you to be able to respond and to situations that might come up. Yep, no surprise, here we are again. At this point, we kind of ran low on tools programming support, and the art pipeline's kind of stoned because there were multiple products in development. And that was really bad because we had all this data, and we were ready to hit the ground running. And I felt like I wanted to contribute more, but I couldn't. I didn't have the programming chops to do it, and I still don't, and I never will. But at that moment, I decided I want to learn programming. And it's a good thing I did because at this point now we have a large substance library and our vendors are starting to use it. The UI actually never saw the light of day. I had to switch to production tasks. But this helped me manage a large growing library and automate a lot of outsourcing. It ended up being pretty integral to me to be able to deliver on my vision of this substance environment. And I'm telling you, I never imagined the programming, okay, I shouldn't say programming, I should say scripting, but I never imagined scripting would be in my wheelhouse. Never thought I could even do it, let alone want to do it. But if you can make a substance graph, you can script, especially with Python. It was incredibly easy to dive in and just start doing it. Everybody goes to Stack Overflow anyway. But Substance Designer is really just about encapsulating a little recipe, right? And then designing how all these recipes interface with each other. And in a nutshell, that's kind of object-oriented programming. So a little bit about the production, right? So I got to touch on a number of different levels of different types of like man-made and organic variety. But I'm going to talk briefly about the ballroom here. So, of course, starting production, and at this point, we didn't know what this level was going to be, really. We had some high-level design goals and gameplay requirements. So I just started making a bunch of library assets because I knew I was going to need to leverage these things later. And here's an example of some of those, like, rendered nicely. And once I had those, I could quickly kit bash things together. And there's probably a lot of these things that never saw the light of day. But of course, just by kit bashing all this stuff together, we could produce this content kind of quickly and reuse as much pieces as we could. So I've got these, you know, 2 ballisters here based on the same base model, but just with, you know, a little bit different styling because we're trying to find the style of the visual style of this environment. And what we're doing now at this point, I know it's like a NASCAR down with all those. Sorry, I know everything's watermarked because they're all the. But at this point, we start to tiling materials onto all of our surfaces. You'll notice that all of these are really, really clean surfaces, right? There's really no secondary and tertiary forms baked in from ZBRUSH because we accumulate a lot of these materials at runtime. So that baluster could be marble, it could be wood, it could be whatever we decide to change inside of the engine. And there's an example of the wood. And so here they are kind of in context, right? So they're just simple bakes, but then with tiling textures applied. And everything you see here is a tiling texture. Even some of the trim sheets, they're all just tiling along the U direction. And so this is pretty cool, right? So like I'm getting back to doing some photography, doing a little bit of technical and workflow. I'm feeling like the actual is kind of meeting the ideal. So what happened? Well, first, I'm the type of person that can get a little narrow focused, right, and make career everything. But there's more to life than that. And you know, by this time I'm married, and you know, as we're talking about the lifestyle that we want and the type of future we want, we just want a different pace of life, right? We're both from small towns, and as far as career goes, I actually kind of missed the structure of EA. You see, I may not have valued it then. It's easy to say, ooh, corporate America, right? But as I said, it really is a well-run business that's prepared me for a successful career. And I got to see what it's like to maybe miss that. And of course, you know, when Epic Games calls, I mean, who's going to say no to that? I mean, dream job right there, right? So before I talk about that, though, I'll talk briefly about my time at Otis, right? And of course, iron sharpens iron. I mean, I learned more in that time teaching than I probably did in a lot of times. But the one thing I learned is that teaching well is hard. I mean, you know, to all of you faculty in here, really huge props, because it takes a lot of sacrifice and dedication, and what you do is not easy. You know, I had taught peers in the context of you know, a company and classes, but really they kind of have to go, right? I mean, it's a company session, but you know, when you're working with students, like I said before, when Jack and Deb, they were setting people up for the rest of their career, for their lives, and it's a huge responsibility. And you're not going to have all the answers. So when I taught, it was natural for me to just go back to what had guided me through most of my career, and that was always theory and practice over technology and tools. Those are always going to change. I can teach you what buttons to press, but I need you to know why those buttons are important, or why some software application may be more important over another or something. And so it was always important to emphasize observation and recording, critical thinking, and being able to solve your own problems. And again, details matter. I was just as concerned with senior organization as I was with final quality. And of course, being efficient, right? We always want to be, you've only got so much time in the day. Work fast, here's some tips, but don't let quality slide. Above everything else, always, always, always strive for quality. But have fun doing it, right? I think you can tell I'm a little bit quirky, that's a word. If I don't believe in what I'm talking about, I'm not having fun doing it, I'm not excited about it, you're not going to get excited about it. So Epic, here we are now. Now, if EA and Naughty Dog were like master classes in different types of game development, then EA, I would say, is probably the graduate school, where now I get to take what I've learned and really refine it. And believe me, it's sharpening me quite a bit. But let's talk about the art test a little bit. So of course I said researching a company is super, super important. Know their values. How do your values align with them? Is that a company you want to work at? Do you believe in what they're doing? But also anticipate their challenges. You know, where are they going and how can I help them? Further on in your career, you're going to have a lot of skills at your disposal. What can you bring to the table? And of course, demonstrate that you can work in the way the company needs you to. Unreal Engine 4, right? But there were some challenges. Taking the test, of course I was finishing Uncharted 4, and this was a couple months before the final release. And I took a risk. I said, you know what? I absolutely am interested in coming to Epic, but I can't leave Uncharted 4 behind. It's been a significant investment, and there's a lot to be said about loyalty, right? There was no way I wasn't going to see this project through. And I was just hoping that, you know, we could stay in contact and I'll chip away on the test, and that they would actually see that as a positive. Epic would, that I was loyal to Uncharted. But then there was the issue of the Unreal Engine. I'd never opened it before, so here I was again, kind of like with applying to Naughty Dog. I've got to demonstrate that I can work in some software that I've never touched before. So I needed a plan, right? I knew that a bunch of my time was going to be just in testing, workflow, trying to figure out how to just functionally do my job. The art might suffer. And because I had a good environment portfolio, but they were interviewing for like character textures. They said, well, can you do textures for characters? My response was, oh, of course. It's still principles, right? Just a little more complex, but kind of the same thing. But I can't demonstrate that, and I haven't demonstrated that previously. So that's where I was going to focus. And of course, material layers, you know, I knew that they used them. We'd been using them at Naughty Dog, and you know, I've been learning recently that not a lot of people actually work this way. I had kind of assumed that it was a very common workflow. If you haven't worked this way, I'd encourage you to try it out. A lot of the Unreal Twitch streams, they cover this type of workflow. We just actually spoke about it at GDC with the Allegorithmic team, so there's some stuff on their website as well. But I knew I had to work that way, so I just dove in and first things first, right? Let's make a bunch of materials and then start applying them to stuff. Wait a minute, Unreal is kind of like Substance, but for materials, that's my jam. I like this. So I kind of started making skins without really thinking about skins. I was just having fun parameterizing everything and being like, let's make a bunch of cool stuff, right? It's like a kid in a candy store. But it was also important for me to demonstrate to them what goes on inside my head. Not just, you know, what I can create, but how I can create it. So I documented a lot of it. I basically just gave them a peek, a high-level overview. Here's my workflow. Here are my values. Here are the challenges that I knew I was going to run into. And here's what I sacrificed. Here's what I think I did well. Here's what I think I could improve, right? Trying to basically give them a taste of who I am and what I value. I guess it worked, because after that, packed up the very supportive wife and the 2 cats now. I had 1 cat before. Now I got 2. And the culture. What can I say about the culture? So it really, really is a marriage of art and technology, right? So you've probably seen some press and stuff, and there's a lot of things going on. Augmented reality, virtual reality, all hot topics right now. And Epic is very much, it's just as much a technology company as it is a games company, right? But art is still very much at the core of what they do. So just like you're trying to build a longevity and a strong business, you have to stay true to the roots, the principles, the artistic philosophy. And they also do this thing, Epic Fridays. So once a month, if you've got the time in your schedule, most of us do at least every other month or something, you can do whatever you want, right? Because the company values curiosity and ideas, just like I was talking about, and exploration and building on your skills. How can you become better at what you do, but also how can you experiment and learn things that might benefit everybody else? A lot of the features and tools that Epic releases actually start this way because someone just decides to tinker. And a little bit about company culture, right? So I've said multiple times now, it's really important to believe in your product or your company to be successful, right? If you're not happy where you're at, you're probably not going to reach your potential for success, right? So Tim Sweeney recently in an article about Epic 4.0 culture, survival requires change. And I'm like, yeah, I've been saying that this whole talk. Flexibility, adaptability, that's great. And they've got diverse games and projects. And cool. I get bored really easily, and I like to tinker, so that sounds great. They're also a super transparent company that's honest about, still learning, right? That's music to my ears because that's been me my whole life. I'm just winging it all the time. Well, okay, not winging it, right? You always want to have as much data as you can behind you, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, right, it never stops. You're never going to have all the answers. It's about that quest of constantly improving, right? So for a business to say, you know what, we're not perfect, but we're going to get better. Well, I'm not perfect either, and I'm going to try to get better too, for me and the business. Because ultimately, true success really is a result of individual and group value alignment. As I said, those things are super, super paramount. And there's hiring practices around that, but ultimately, right, it's just the best fit for you and the company. Now, I actually just the other day just celebrated my 1-year anniversary there at Epic, and I've had a really, I think, good career. I would still say I'm not as good as a lot of people, but I've been very happy with the success that I've had. And like I said, you're always going to improve. It's human tendency to say, yeah, I'm the king up on the mountain. I am the man or the woman. But you never, ever, ever do that because realistically, your career is going to look like this. You're going to get to the top of one ladder, and you're going to go down some chutes and then take some crazy other ladder in another direction. You're always going to improve, right? I've got a lot of skills that I've carried with me from company to company, but trying to incorporate those skills in a different culture, with different values, with different challenges, it takes time. I'll give you an example, actually. One of the image-based lighting and reference. It's always been kind of a big thing for me, right? And I noticed a gap in one of the character, reference pipelines. I'm like, ooh, I can help there. Let's talk IBLs and HDRs and color correction. And I started doing what I could to improve that with some off-the-shelf products like I've always done. Now, there's some margin of error with that, right? It's not perfect. And then I had a meeting with the CTO, Kim Library, and I was like, I can help. Let's help, right? And what he did was great. He laid out some pretty exacting details of what he wanted and what he expected, like a good leader would. And pretty quickly I realized, I'm not your man, right? He wanted perfect data, right? Like go in there, like here's some Python module to start you, but let's get this Python program going. Right away I was like, okay, over my head. I'm not your man to help you with that right now. And it's easy to walk away from situations like that disappointed, but the other way to look at that is to walk away and say, well, there's two things I learned from that. One, now I have a direction that I can go in to help improve these skills. May not be now, it may not be later, but there's something I can work on. I also knew, the second thing, that I was in the right place, right? Because effectively, what he said without saying it was that good enough wasn't good enough, right? We can do better. So let's strive for that. So that's what I walked away from that conversation with. So, I guess to kind of close out, so here's some examples I did actually on Paragon. So this is our good buddy Crunch. This was actually the first character I did. And I'll tell you, what I learned in this process was 1,000 ways to not texture a character, right? I did it all wrong. Cost myself a lot of late nights. But you try it, and then you improve the next time and get better and better and better. And then, of course, here he is in his one of his Challenger skins. And then this is another one I did here. So this is Twin Blast in one of his Shadow Ops skins. But the one thing I'd say that has been a constant through the career, and to quote Walt Disney, is you can design and create and build the most wonderful place in the world, but it takes people to make that dream a reality. And that is absolutely, absolutely true. The success of the team and the unity of the team is absolutely paramount. And it always goes back to what your values are together as a unit and as a company, and how you're going to help each other through the tough times. So thank you all for having me here. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and hopefully it'll be one of the weirder career presentations you've ever seen, but I hope you had fun. And by the way, I also have some raffle stuff to give away. I forget if I mentioned it in the beginning, but yeah, no, I did mention it. So Epic has given me some shirts. Let's see, there's mouse pads, USB sticks. There's just a few different things in some of these bags. So you all have a ticket, right?
Before we do that, I think we owe you a round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What was I doing? Oh yeah, okay. So we're going to do Price is Right style, just to kind of keep in line with the Plinko thing. I'm going to throw out a number, and we'll just see who gets closest without going over. So let's start with 32. Oh, 32. All right. So 32. So here's, you get to pick a bag then.
You get a whole bag? Goodness.
Somebody start a timer. All right.
Isn't there a t-shirt at each one, Brian?
So, okay, well, there's a t-shirt in 2, and then this one has like a tumbler and a coaster. Okay. That's true. There's 3 different sizes here. Okay. 24. 24. Someone 24? You're 24?
Yes.
All right, 24 gets it. So you get to pick a bag here.
Which one? This one?
There's an extra large and a medium there. All right. By the way, these are legit the most comfortable shirts like people will go out of their way at GDC to get Epic shirts. All right, 16. All right. So you've got your pick of 16. You got that?
Yeah.
All right, sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. So we have, actually, this is my personal favorite, the tumbler and the coaster. Let's see. My lucky number is 12. Let's go with 12. All right. I think we've got a 12 over here. All right. There you go. Congratulations.
Did you have a few minutes for some questions? If anybody has
Yeah.
some questions.
Sure.
We'll have a few minutes for questions from Brad, and so if you want to ask those now, we'll do about 10 minutes tops, maybe. All right, I'll set a timer. Anybody have any questions for Brad?
Anything. Well, not anything, but anything within reason. Which really means anything, because it's...
Everybody's good?
Oh. Yeah, okay.
What's the biggest mistake you've made, like, for a big company like Epic or EA or something like that?
That's a good question. The biggest mistake? I would probably say just that one that I described where I had sort of a blowout. I mean, that was, like I said, communication was kind of tough for a while, and I intentionally went to yell at him. Bad move. You know, I mean, it was at a tough time in the project. People understood, but under no circumstances is that okay. You know, as far as it comes to delivering work, that's easy. Whenever I've let myself down or someone else down, that's an easy one to fix, right? You just put in a few extra hours, or, you know, a lot of it's also too just finding out what corners to cut. You're not going to be able to win all the battles, so pick the right ones. But letting down someone else in that way, that was not a good feeling. So, yeah.
When it comes to like company, I guess production practices might be the best one, but there are more quirks. What was your favorite in the line of things like Free Fridays, where people have that sort of freedom to do things? Like, what was something that a company did that would stray from a normal production standard to like empower their workers to do better?
Yeah. I certainly like Epic Fridays because, like I said, I love to tinker. But really, actually, EA did a lot of that early on. I mean, you know, they were doing a lot of different. Actually, you taught a lot of the classes, I think, once they started gearing up. But for a while in the beginning, like that was actually kind of a lot of part of like the lead's job descriptions is we would put on classes, and we would also like you would even bring in like traditional stuff and do like figure drawing. But they were always encouraging that type of, you know, improvement atmosphere. And then on top of that, there was a lot of like business development classes. So as you started to get into leadership roles, they're really fostering you to be better individually and to benefit the company. So they really did a lot there for both the individual and the organization. I think that's probably one of my favorite examples. Question in the back there?
How do you stay sane during crunch?
Am I allowed to? Well, these days I'm lucky that I have an incredibly supportive wife. You know, but I think, gosh, you know, and I actually wanted to touch on this a little bit in my talk, and I sort of distilled it down to what I think I could in a reasonable time. But honestly, it goes back to the values of the company and the product. I can't tell you enough how important that is. If you don't believe in your bosses, maybe your bosses just don't care to improve, maybe business goals aren't in alignment with something else. The moment you start to kind of feel like, you know, I love what I do here and I love this place, but it might not be a good fit for me, that's when crunch gets hard, right? But if you love what you do and you believe in what you're doing, you know, I look at crunch as it's a reality of this industry, but it's also, this industry is no exception to a lot of other industries, and there's people that work multiple jobs. You know, I wouldn't say it's fair to single out the games industry for overtime, especially if the organization is actively trying to improve it. That speaks volumes. You know what, if it's happening this week, but we're going to try to make it better next time, let's power through this. Yeah. I think you went up first. We'll go, and then we'll go to you.
What is the work culture difference that you found between Naughty Dog and Epic?
Between Naughty Dog and Epic? Well, I think the biggest thing, and I touched on it a little bit there, is Epic. You know, Naughty Dog does one thing extremely well. It's a very linear narrative experience, right? It's as close as you can get to creating a filmic experience in an interactive format, maybe, or arguably not. But Epic is, I don't want to say a technology company first, but it's a technology company that makes games, right? And a bunch of different types of games. They're not just hedging all their bets on being really, really good at one thing. Maybe that implies that Naughty Dog is. Maybe that wasn't right. But Epic is taking a lot of risks, and they're making technology that really kind of drives the industry. So, You know, Naughty Dog might set a lot of like the visual and workflow, or not workflow, but the visual and the sort of like format standards. You know, but Epic is very much in the technology side and also setting a lot of standards for the industries. I don't know if that answered your question, but I hope so.
I would also like want to know how like the crunch time like.
Oh, the crunch. Oh, sorry. You're probably like, what's this guy talking about?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I can say is I mean, actually, is Epic has been pretty good. I mean, it's the reality of the product. I'm on Paragon, and we have regular release schedules now. It wasn't always that before I got on the project. It wasn't always that way. We know what Paragon is now, and we know how to schedule for it. So I'm scheduled out now for the next like year and a half. Like I know what my tasks are now. Job security, but crunch is kind of short bursts. You know, if a character is releasing and I need to kind of put a few extra hours in to up the visual quality or to finish it out or, you know, whatever, I do that. Naughty Dog was a little more sustained. Yeah. Question back there in the blue.
Do you have any suggestions or tips of how to research a company? Because right now my mindset is just get the intro job, and I've thought about like if anything, imagine my deal is just like get in and see what happens next.
Yeah.
But maybe I have to start reconsidering my approach. And how would you suggest going about that?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk about that, but I had to cut it too. So, I mean, obviously, like things like, crap, I forget the site now, but like Game of Sutra, any job posting, any job boards, ArtStation is actually starting to get popular now. A lot of different companies also, it's kind of in vogue to have internet presidents, right? Presidents? Internet presidents? Is that a internet presence? So, I mean, and then Glassdoor, because especially Glassdoor is, I mean, those are employees speaking about the company, right? You don't get much more honest than Glassdoor. But then also just their websites. And actually, every once in a while, I sort of like just take a peek at job postings. Not because I'm actually looking for a job, but because the market is always changing, right? Your value, you know, as a substance specialist now, that wasn't a thing a couple of years ago, but now people are asking for substance specialists. Keep an eye on job boards, job postings. The GDC Vault, most of that's on YouTube now. Any of those industry talks that you can get your hands on to sort of look at that company. And then a lot of times when you look at a company's website and they post their values, so far it's been true. I mean, just like we wouldn't want to lie on our resume, and then, you know, once we get a job, it's like, ha, I really don't know any of that. Although I've seen that happen, don't do that. You know, companies are kind of like that too. If they really believe in something and they put it on their site, at least in my experience, it's been pretty good.
All right. Well, thanks again, Brad, for coming, and I really appreciate you coming and spending time with us. If you guys give one last round of applause.
Thank you.